if the geopolitics continue to deteriorate and we can increasingly see ourselves at risk of war in the Euro-Atlantic through a belligerent Russia, a regional war in the Middle East where we've got an interest that we would have to engage on, and in the Far East where we are, we have an awful lot of trade in that region, and also the quid pro quo is that if America remains engaged in Europe, Europe needs to be engaged in the Pacific. Then, defence spending is going to have to climb and climb and climb again.
The former Armed Forces Minister for the Conservative government, James Heappey. He's with me in the studio. Hello to you, James.
Hi, John.
Good to see you. Before, James, we get on to some of the more openly, clearly political questions, I'm interested in your views, as I am in so many views today, on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Now, you were a professional soldier. You're an 8-year British Army man. You were a major. You served in Afghanistan and Iraq. So your perspective, watching the ceremonies today, these so moving ceremonies, but through the eyes of a former serving soldier. Tell me your feelings and your thoughts.
So they are moving, and moving in lots of ways, actually. Moving because you see in the background the beaches that were the scenes for these amazing landings, the scale of which was just awesome. Moving in that you hear the testimony of veterans, and there's some, I think it's BBC Two at the moment, are sort of reanimating some of the contemporary recordings, testimony that were taken by veterans, and to sort of listen to those and then see these men in their 90s and over 100 now stood there, and to sort of connect who they are now with the testimonies that I've been listening to on the TV this week. That's really amazing. And then, do you know, the other bit that really caught me today, John, and it's a silly thing, but there was a veteran, he must have been well into his 90s, who led the exhortation, in the act of remembrance, when you go home, say of them and us. And he was being supported, propped up, by a young sailor from HMS Prince of Wales, one of our aircraft carriers. And when the last post played, there was just this amazing picture. It's on the MOD Twitter feed, if any of your listeners want to go and find it, where the veteran is there with his eyes closed, his sort of upper lip trembling, and you can sort of see that he's remembering that day 80 years ago. And stood next to him is this young, must be 18, 19, 20 sailor, with just a look of steely determination to kind of live up to their legacy. And I just thought that was a wonderful kind of juxtaposition between the young men and women who serve in our armed forces today and those that were responsible for that amazing heroism 80 years ago.
And what about the overwhelming majority of the rest of us for whom D-Day it's history? It exists in our imagination and only there. Do you reckon the lesson of D-Day, and the recognised need for strong defence of freedom, has that lesson faded? Has that awareness faded?
No, I think that the great prize of peace, or the great price of peace maybe, is that complacency comes, right? Like when you stop fearing for your security, and that doesn't mean that we're any different now to people that have gone before us, societies that have gone before us. When we felt secure, we haven't worried about it. I also hate, there's some people over the last 48 hours who have tried to make the culture wars sneak into D-Day. That's
how do you mean?
Well, sort of, young people today, they wouldn't be able to do what their grandfathers did.
You don't buy that?
That's utter words you can't say on Times Radio at 4:30 in the afternoon. The young men and women who stepped up in the Second World War, the First World War, Korea, the Falklands. There's something innate in all humans that when your kin are threatened, you have the ability to fight for them. And
so in that sense, then we've heard from the outgoing head of the army, General Sir Patrick Sanders, who said Britain wouldn't be ready now for a third World War. He was referring, overwhelmingly to equipment and
exactly.
And that kind of readiness. You're talking about psychological readiness, and you contend that on that front, Britain is completely ready. Do you?
No,
some would disagree.
No. I'm making a very different point. I'm saying that innate in all of us. When people are disparaging about today's teenagers, that's unfair. I think when they are faced with the necessity of defending their country, defending their freedom, protecting their families and their communities, they will go and fight for king and country like anybody else. The point, Patrick Sanders's point about our preparedness as a nation to fight at scale is really well made. We've got a fantastic set of armed forces. They could do it packing a bigger punch, but people are overstate how denuded they are. They're still incredibly formidable. But where Patrick is entirely right is that since the end of the Cold War, we haven't had to worry about sustaining high-tempo war fighting for a sustained period of time. And we need to regrow the industrial base that could allow us to renew our military capability. We need to be able to manufacture more ammunition, hold more spares. And I suppose there is a thing about our mindset, since you ask, we've just gone through a period of time where with the pandemic and with the cost of living crisis, society's response has been, over to you, government, what are you going to do to solve this? A war-fighting nation probably has to be more resilient at the individual family and community level. We can't expect the state to solve all of our problems whilst the state is also war fighting.
Right. Now, have a listen to this then, on the question of resources for the British military. Your former colleague, Ben Wallace, he was Defence Secretary, of course. He spoke to our Andrew Neil a little earlier on, and he was talking about 2.5%. That's the British government commitment, 2.5% of national earnings for defence by 2030. He said it's not enough. He said we should go the way of Poland and put that figure at 4%.
So the Poles are going to 4% of GDP. Right. And that is a discussion we could all have. They're going to have an army of 200,000 people. And we definitely could have that discussion. I would venture that we should continue the rise in spending that started under Boris and Rishi, right? Yes, it was cut under George Osborne and David Cameron. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Labour's record was actually they took it from 3% of GDP to 2.2%. And only when they factored in the Iraq war did it go up to 2.6 in its final year.
So that's Ben Wallace. Do you agree with him?
Yeah. And I agree with Patrick. I agree with Ben. I think
4% is quite a gulf between 2.5% and 4%.
Yeah, of course it is. And there's a journey to getting there, and the geopolitical situation will naturally drive that trend. It's important not to be too dismissive of 2.5. That in itself is a big commitment, and what it will do. People who tell you that 2.5 is going to allow us to grow the armed forces, they're talking nonsense. What 2.5 allows you to do is to bring that resilience and readiness that I was just talking about to the force that we've got at the moment, which is necessary, a good thing. If the geopolitics continue to deteriorate and we can increasingly see ourselves at risk of war in the Euro-Atlantic through a belligerent Russia, a regional war in the Middle East where we've got an interest that we would have to engage on, and in the Far East, where we are, we have an awful lot of trade in that region, and also the quid pro quo is that if America remains engaged in Europe, Europe needs to be engaged in the Pacific. Then defence spending is going to have to climb and climb and climb again.
Right. You know, as a former defence minister, that these aspirations don't mean anything really without some sort of timetable. You can say you want to get to a certain target. You've got to have some idea of when. At what point should this country get to not just 2.5%, but 4% of national earnings for defence?
So my view would be that 2.5 needs to happen as soon as possible.
And when 4%,
industry is ready, I think, to absorb that extra cash now and provide us with the things that we would want to spend it on. The journey to 3.5 and 4 is as you develop the industrial capacity, frankly, to spend it, John. There's absolutely no point saying we're going to spend 4% on GDP now and then not be able to buy the stuff that you need to buy because you've not got the manufacturing capability to do so.
Yes. While you're speaking, James, also I'm listening to you closely and with a great deal of interest, but I'm also looking at the live pictures from Normandy, and I can see now President Emmanuel Macron at the podium giving his contribution to the commemorations. We know there's a whole lineup of the principal leaders of the free world there, but not Rishi Sunak. He was there earlier on, I know, but he's not there now, apparently, getting ready for the election. I mean, does that make sense to you? Is that a wise move? I mean, Keir Starmer's there.
Well, look, the head of state of the US, France, the UK is there or has been there.
Yeah, but not there now.
I don't know if the king is still there or not.
No, the king is there, but not our prime minister.
So the king is the head of state. Whether or not the head of government should still be there, discuss. But I'm not responsible for the prime minister's diary.
As I say, I mean, Keir Starmer is there, and he's busy with the election too.
So I don't know.
Oh, let me ask you this then, James. We've got a very limited time now. Again, tell me this: as a patriot, somebody who wishes our country nothing but well and nothing but secure. It's possible we'll have a new government in a few weeks' time. It's possible that Keir Starmer could be the leader of our country. Does Keir Starmer look to you to be the stuff of a national leader and potentially a war leader? Is he made of that material? Do you believe, Keir Starmer?
Look, I've seen Keir up close when I've had to give Privy Council terms briefings on various things that have happened over the last 2 years or so, or 3 years or so. He asks the right questions, he listens carefully, and in that sense, I would say I've got every confidence in his ability to kind of assimilate the advice he's been given and understand the gravity of the situation he's faced with. I'll make the observation, though, that I do worry some of the things that he said, particularly the sort of repealing of the legislation that protects veterans from prosecution in Northern Ireland, hints at a lack of understanding of the responsibility that he carries as the head of government to give confidence to our armed forces